we've talked a whole lot about all the people who've transferred between last season and this season. We're going to be talking about a lot more of those people, possibly some of the same people, when the transfer portal window opens again on April 15th. But one person who we have not heard from since his transfer, at least publicly, is Princely Umanmielen. So Princely Umanmielen was a Florida edge rusher last year, one of Florida's better players on the team. He entered the transfer portal after the season. He wound up at Ole Miss, one of a great defensive line haul at Ole Miss that also includes Walter Nolan from Texas A&M. Princely Umanmielen spoke to the media in Oxford, and here's what he had to say.
My attacking the run game a little bit, but I feel like here I'm getting coached harder for things like that. You know, I feel like at Florida, like the way I was coached, it was kind of like, it was almost as if like they was just telling me to go out there and use my talent, if that makes sense. But here, you know, Coach Lou and Coach Coach Joyner, they really on me about the little things, you know, attacking the run. Coach Lou really goes through the progressions of the drops and the routes that are being run when I have to go into coverage. Like when I was at Florida, it was like they would just tell me, go drop to this area, and I would have to figure out everything else on my own. But here, you know, they go real into depth. I feel like I'm actually getting, you know, developed here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shade being thrown.
Throwing the old staff under the bus. Now, Florida's had some staff changes. Sean Spencer was let go as the D-line coach. Gerald Chapman comes in. Mike Peterson still coaching the edge rushers. So I'm not sure who he's throwing shade at here exactly, other than the entirety of the Florida defensive staff, much of which is still there. But that's rough. And you said this to me when we saw the clip. And you're like, Billy Napier needs the season to get here.
Just needs to play football
really quickly.
Football games need to be played here. And it's tough because I don't know that Princely Umanmielen, from me watching that through, my first watch was like, I don't think he went to the podium saying like, all right, I'm about to just cook this Florida staff.
Pete Golding and his staff at Ole Miss.
No, I mean, what you mentioned that we talked about before we got on air, like there's nothing that's going to be said that's going to remedy the thing that Steve Spurrier said, that Princely Umanmielen said. Like, what's going to help remedy this is getting a win week 1 against Miami and starting the season off with a bang, and then we, you know, don't even think about this.
Well, and you've already, if you have not seen this yet, JD put out a video a couple weeks ago, the Never Too Early series. He's already starting to preview. The big week 1, week 2, week 3 games, and Florida Miami was the first one because it's one of those it's one of those crazy games where it does not matter who wins. The opposing fan base is going to want to jump off a cliff.
For sure. And it'll be week 1.
Yeah.
So it'll be like a nice start to the college football season.
And it might not be representative of what that team will be.
Not at all. I mean, Florida beat Utah, first game of the Billy Napier era, and we were like, okay, Billy Napier, give him the crown. Is Anthony Richardson
going to be a first-round draft? Wait, he was a first-round draft pick.
Is he going to win the Heisman? Like, all those conversations. What about Utah? Are they in the tank now? And then we saw, okay, week 1 is a very small piece of the puzzle. So, yeah, it's going to be intense.
But yeah, Florida's in that situation where and this is the problem you get into when I think the transfer portal era exacerbates this problem where if you have bad news, if you're coming off a not great season and you have some bad news, it just compounds and compounds. And there's not really a way to create good news unless you spend like a drunken sailor on NIL in the transfer portal and get some very different players that you get everybody excited about. But the problem is when you're in this situation where Billy Napier is right now, it's hard to get those guys to come because they don't know what the future holds immediately at Florida.
Sure. They don't know what they're signing up for either. I mean, this whole game, too, not to go back too far to this preview, but like, Andy, I don't know if you feel the same way. If it were played at a neutral site, I'd probably lean pretty heavily towards Miami. Now, maybe that's me, like you just said, with the recency bias. Maybe that's me drinking the Cam Ward Kool-Aid. But the fact that it's played in Gainesville in the swamp just throws a total variable of like, who the heck knows what's about to happen in this game kind of feel to me.
Yeah, I have no idea. I suspect Miami is better than what we saw last year. And the last time we saw Miami in that bowl game, they were awful.
Yep.
So like they will presumably be better. Last year it was a big offensive line haul. This year is a big D-line haul. But also they had some pretty good young players that you suspect will sort of evolve. Florida, they had some young players to be excited about, like Eugene Wilson. Graham Mertz, I thought, was actually better than expected at quarterback. Sure. But Shamar James should be back. Like that should be a very exciting thing. But you lose a Princely Umanmielen, who should have, like in a past era, wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Like wouldn't have left.
Been the leader for your defense.
Yeah.
Been the guy to kind of lead the charge into, his final year in Gainesville, more or less. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the thing that is tough for them is did Florida net out better talent-wise after this offseason? Now, you can talk about L.J. McCray and DJ Lagway and the recruiting class. The question is, what impact is that going to make this year?
Yeah.
Because I think in the old model, like I've said this about Billy Napier multiple times. If he'd been hired in 2010, I think he'd be sitting in a really good spot right now because he would have had 3 good recruiting classes. The first recruiting class would have been coming of age. Trevor Etienne, instead of being in Athens, Georgia. Now, he had a bad weekend in Athens.
Sure.
But he's in Athens, Georgia. He would still be at Florida. Princely Umanmielen would still be at Florida. Like, those guys would not have left. But it's a different era.
Totally different.
You weren't hired in 2010. You were hired in before the 2022 season.
Yeah.
And so you have to adapt. You have to adjust. And I think they've been slow on the transfer portal the entire time. And part of it was, I think when they got there, you hadn't seen yet Lincoln Riley do the flip that he did. Now, that was the same year.
Yeah.
But you hadn't seen many coaches flip a roster via the transfer portal the way now it is common and accepted practice. Like if a new coach comes in, of course he's flipping the roster.
Totally, yeah.
That didn't happen year 1 at Florida. I think that put them behind the 8 ball, and I think them letting a lot get away this year and not bringing in a lot that felt like a comparable replacement is going to be a problem.
And the tough part, too, coming from Louisiana, it wasn't like he came from an Oklahoma and could bring his Heisman quarterback, his slot receiver.
It's funny,
that was a stud.
he did bring
brought
2 really
Johnson,
good –
which
Montrell
was a
Johnson
stud.
and Osiris Torrance, who was a great offensive lineman for them.
He brought some dudes, but I mean just like the overall he was able to have of guys that could help him at the SEC level was different. And Andy, I don't know how you feel about this, but like I look at Florida this year, and granted the South Carolina game very much so could have lost. Took a great effort in the fourth quarter to come back down 10. But there's 2 other games where it's like, hey, you make the field goal against Arkansas. Hey, you don't give up 4th and 17 against a really good Missouri team. Like, I know the label on this team is 5-7, but I keep looking at – I know they lost some pieces, Princely and Umanmielen we mentioned. Yeah. I don't know that it's a 5-7 roster. I feel like it's a maybe 5-7 execution that we saw last year.
Well, is it a 5 – so, okay, 5-7 roster is a hard thing to articulate now.
Sure.
Because the schedules are different. They're not equal in the SEC. What a 5-7 roster looks like against Ole Miss's schedule is very different than what a 5-7 roster looks like against Florida's schedule, because a 5-7 roster against Florida's 2024 schedule might not win 5 games.
Yeah, without question.
So,
and I think that's the thing too. Like Florida could very realistically finish 6-6 and probably be like a top 30 team in the country, depending on what those 6-6 look like.
Pretty good job.
And I wonder
this year considering.
And I worry a little bit about like what is the approval rating in Gainesville if you go 6-7, 5-7, and then finish 6-6, and who knows about the bowl game? Because I feel like the context is so crucial. Like you said, the schedule. Like they finished with 5 college football playoff teams. Here.
How it looks matters. That's the thing. Is how does it look? Game 6 at Tennessee, I think is where the rubber may meet the road. But here's the thing: nobody's talking about Texas A&M coming to Gainesville. Yeah. Like. That is a tricky one. Mike Elko's going to have them better. Yep. Like they're going to be probably significantly better than they were last year. The UCF game, like I realized they were scheduled. I think they were actually scheduled by. I think one dates back to the Jeremy Foley as athletic director era, and one is in the Scott Strickland era. But Miami and UCF playing in the same year, when you already have Florida State. And it's a very good version of Florida State. Like, that is brutal. Because Miami, obviously, they want to beat you.
Yeah.
But UCF wants to beat you even worse.
For sure.
Like, UCF wants to go to the Swamp and beat. Now, remember, UCF did win the last time they played. It was in a bowl game.
Yeah, I remember,
But
Bowser.
very different situation then. This one would hurt so much more.
Yeah.
And it is, and somebody was trying to burn me because I went to Florida. They were like, I bet KJ Jeffers is going to bring UCF in there and win. I'm like, that's a really bold prediction considering he beat them with a worse Arkansas team.
Sure, yeah.
Like, the Arkansas team he was on is probably worse, or was worse last year's, than this UCF's team is going to be.
Yeah.
So you got to worry about that. Like, that is a scary schedule. And it's not just, everybody keeps looking at the back half. There's some scary stuff in the front half.
Especially with the way that it shapes up. I mean, let's say Miami doesn't go your way. Let's say you beat Samford, A&M, who knows, at Mississippi State. And then that game against UCF, like, Andy, that could kind of be the one, depending on how the vibes are in Gainesville. Like, it's not an enormously patient bunch.
If you don't win that game, it crushes the vibes. The vibes, the vibes die on the vine, no matter what has happened before.
The Vibe Bowl. That is the Vibe Bowl for folks in Gainesville with the one against UCF. Yeah, it's massive. And also the fact that it's in-state, like UCF, as much as maybe they're perceived as not one of those big three, they're now a power conference school. Yeah. Like they're one of those schools that's kind of trending upward.
Yep.
I mean, it's massive
but
for optics.
That's the reason why Florida never wanted to schedule UCF or USF, because it is kind of a no-win situation. Like, you beat them, you were supposed to beat them. You lose to them, the world is ending.
100%.
And now they're in that situation. So I just it feels like piling on at this point. Like hearing Princely Umanmielen say that, people keep like, I go on Feinbaum and he'll always say, "What's the temperature in Gainesville?" And I mean, the temperature is lukewarm. Yeah, the fan base is apathetic. They're not excited. They're scared of what's going to happen. But it feels at this point like it's just piling on.
It almost is like it's reached a point where if somebody comes out in the next 2 weeks and says something derogatory about Florida and their staff, it's like, okay, I'm already at this place where it doesn't matter. You can't hurt me anymore. I've been hurt too many times.
Yeah, I'm numb to this.
I'm titanium.
Is what people would tell you.
Come back week 1 is what I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's if you're Billy Napier, because I get people asking me all the time, what should Billy Napier do different? Do this. Like, there is nothing that matters that he could do different right now in terms of like media strategy or what he says, or none of that matters. Mm-hmm. You either win or you don't. Mm-hmm. Like, if he goes out there and has a great season, great. He gets to keep being Florida's coach. Yep. If he doesn't have a good season, he's probably not going to be Florida's coach. Like, that is really all it comes down to. And I realize that is a very simplistic and probably counterproductive way to look at that as someone who has to host shows from now until football season starts. But that's the truth. Yeah.
And I love what you said. It matters how it looks with him in some of those games, especially if they can kind of keep it on.
Yeah, are you competitive against
train
college
tracks.
Football playoff teams? Then that is a very different thing than if you're getting blown out by college football playoff teams or losing to teams that have no business even thinking about a college football playoff.
And I hope that nuance is baked into the majority of the fan base's assessment of what this year is, because the way they finish that schedule is Hunger Games, and the front half isn't easy either. So I hope that 6-6 is like,
and the SEC flipping the schedule. And I said this was going to happen when they tabled the idea of whether they're going to do 8 or 9 games until 2026. When they said they're definitely doing 8 conference games in 2025, I said this will happen. They're just going to flip the 24 schedule. And everybody's like, why would they? They can't do that. That's not fair to certain teams. And if you're Tennessee or Ole Miss, you're like, great. Yeah, that's way better.
Front to back.
If you are Florida or Georgia, you're like, oh God, again. What do we talk? At least Georgia's hard road games become hard home games, but this still sucks. It's still hard.
What's that meme? Stop giving me your toughest battles. It's the Florida logo.
Exactly. I mean, and but here's why I said that when I said it. Why I said they're just going to flip the schedule, because I think they're ultimately going to go to 9 games. Because they're not going to miss a Texas A&M Texas game. They're not going to miss a Georgia Auburn game. They're not going to miss an Alabama Tennessee game. Those are all games that go away if you stay at 8 games and you have that same schedule. Now, if you were to add teams, then it becomes a different situation. You're going probably to a new schedule format anyway, and you can decide if it's 8 or 9 and figure out what you want to do. But I guarantee you this. They're not going to miss any Texas or Texas A&M games. They're going to play every year. They're going to figure out a way to make them play every year. They're going to figure out a way for Tennessee and Alabama to play every year, and they're going to figure out a way for Georgia and Auburn to play every year. So however that looks, And I realize I'm the one who said, well, they're definitely going to do 9 games. They'll always do 9 games. They're going to 9 games.
Sure.
Well, let's be real here. College football is going to change dramatically over the next 3, 4, 5 years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't know what it's going to look like. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.